Hey there folks, welcome back to another Last Epic Alkalite build video. Sorry I'm doing all of these, but it's more for me at this point as I document all these builds I'm testing for the multiplayer patch. Trying to do as much as I can with Alkalite minion builds before I decide on what to start with, but after flame rates, I'm not really sure what else is going to compete for the same budget. After what I considered to be a disaster of the poison skeleton rogues, I wasn't sure how well this build was going to work out, but it's actually faring a bit better. This is the Abomination Mage. While not entirely original, I did want to put my own spin on the Abomination build. The idea for this build is pretty simple. It's designed around the Age of Undying Abomination so that it doesn't decay HP, which is honestly the biggest downside to Abomination. It has way too much upkeep to have its HP decay faster and faster until it eventually dies, kind of like a Wraith. So I feel Age of Undying is mandatory, and because of that we only have two sides of the tree we can take. We can either go the Arrow Nova and Double Strike side, or the Mage's side. I've seen build videos based around Arrow Nova, and I wasn't really a fan. Clear speed looked really bad. So I wanted to make an Abomination that can clear maps faster, because the Arrow Nova one is just awful. The main downside to Arrow Nova is that it shoots at set intervals, and the Hungering Souls from the Mages has an actual cooldown. So we can use idols with minion cooldown recovery to cut that down in half essentially, so we have like a 3-second cooldown on Hungering Souls rather than 6. Hungering Souls is also interesting because it's a spell that does necrotic damage, so we can scale on those for our minion rather than just flat minion damage or minion melee damage. Hungering Souls also does a better job at map clear because it shoots in a cone in front of the Abomination, rather than Arrow Nova, which shoots in all directions and really just hits one or two guys. So that's one of the main parts of the build. The other is how we summon the Abomination. So if you notice, I don't have any skeletons on my bar. Despite that, we will be using both skeletons and skeleton mages. I don't have skeletons as a mastery. Some people keep forgetting that you don't actually have to master a skill to use it. And because it's not mastered, we just have the default amount of skeletons and 2 different skeletons. We have skeleton mages mastered, so we can have 3 different mages. And we want them mastered because we get an extra mage, which gives us extra projectiles on Hungering Souls. So we will have 5 different types of skeletons and a total of 12 minions to sacrifice to our Abomination. We could get more with another ring and a chest mod, or even just picking up skeletons as an actual mastery, which would be pretty strong. It'd be like 45-50% more multiplicative damage, which is pretty big, but we'll discuss gearing in a minute. Abomination Mage though has dealt with everything the game has to offer: 350 plus corruption maps and the respective bosses, T4 dungeon bosses, no problem at all. The map clear speed isn't the fastest thing around, it's just because it's a single minion and it's hard to have him deal with a lot of adds. I was hoping Hungering Souls would do a better job at map clear, and it's not bad by any means, but after flame rates it's kind of hard to compete, I guess. Having a single minion also leaves you open to getting attacked, so it's definitely not as safe as running wraiths and skeletons either, so you do have to be more attentive towards the enemies that are around you. The biggest downside to mapping though is that some of the modifiers really hinder your Abomination. The 2 in particular are chance at glancing blows, which makes enemies take significantly less damage on hit, and since we revolve around doing one big hit for enemies, that can basically make them survive hits and essentially cut our clear speed down in half. Not too fun. The other one is crit avoidance. Now you'd think that that wouldn't be an issue since we're using the Dread Shade with the perk that allows your minions to always crit, but that's kind of a lie. I'm not sure if it's intentional, but what it really does is just set your minions crit chance to 100%. So if enemies have crit avoidance rate, well, now you have 50% chance because your crits won't crit. They can not crit. So their modifier supersedes yours, which is kind of lame to be honest, but I get how that works. It's just a modifier you need to keep out for because it's also going to drastically reduce your clear speed. Outside of that though, he does clear just fine as I mentioned, it's just not as fast as wraiths. For bossing, the Abomination is actually really good, which is surprising because the Hungering Souls shouldn't be shotgunning bosses. That's just him being a beef with absurd attack speed. He has enough leech and bulk so that he doesn't even die to tier 4 Julra beams, or pretty much anything else that I've thrown at him, so can't really complain on bossing. And this build definitely works great. There is a certain charm to having just one giant beef of a monster that will do your job for you, and if it wasn't for rates, I'd say this is probably one of the better builds for Alkalite. The only problem is that it's way more gear dependent than other builds if you really want to push his damage. Alright, so let's go ahead and talk about the gear for the Mage Abomination build. So, this build is going to require a lot more gear than other builds, unfortunately. So for the staff, we do need a Staff of the Coven, which has +1 minion skills, and then we need to get that to roll with minion spell damage. It's going to be rough to get one, but you kind of need it. You need every little point you can get for the Abomination, unfortunately. Cast speed is also something you should craft on if you can, because increased cast speed will increase your blood rip cast speed, which is great. Minion melee damage is something else you should also put on if you don't have it already. It's not super mandatory because we are going to be focusing on the mage portion of the Abomination, but it is still nice to have for bossing. Pretty standard helmet. We do want the Profane Mask for the adaptive spell damage it gives to minions, because we're going to be using spells. And then obviously just int and health. That's pretty much it. For the amulet, we're going to be using another Death Rattle, of course, with minion damage and health, because we're going to be always critting. We definitely want that multi-strike modifier. Chest piece. Increase minion health, intelligence, health. Like, same as the helmet. It's the same stuff. For the ring, we have a hollowed finger with minion damage and crit strike avoidance. You don't need crit strike avoidance here in the ring. You can get it on the belts or the boots or whatever else you can, but you know, get a hollow finger. We do want the extra maximum skeleton, just because it gives us like 3% more multiplicative damage for our golem, plus it has crit strike multiplier. So yeah, get a hollow finger. Thornslinger, very odd belt, but it has +1 to physical skills, and Abomination is a physical skill, so you get +1 to Abomination from this. Other than that, you do want to just cram whatever modifiers you can. Getting high legendary potential Thornslingers is not terribly difficult. So yeah, I've just got minion damage, health regen, and hybrid health. We're running a Ribbons of Blood just so our minions can leech and just so they don't get crit. It's a good ring there. Again, you don't need crit strike avoidance here. You can get on the belt or the boots or something, but for the gloves, Julra's Obsession, because the adaptive spell damage is going to be applying to our minions as well. As far as a legendary potential modifier, I know the increased minion damage is not something unique or crazy that can abuse that, you know, stats on this item also apply to your minions modifier, but there's honestly not too much on gloves that was actually going to help our Abomination. Cast speed maybe, but I mean, even then, that's not a huge deal. So you can either get a cast speed or minion damage. Boots, we're just running fire resistance boots. They have movement speed, they have health, ice sealed, some void res, nothing special here. Just, you know, get some good boots. And then this is the heart of the build, literally the Twisted Heart of Uhkeiros. This is not a hard item to get. You just have to keep doing the Dragon Horde boss, but you do need to get one with a tier 7 Assemble Abomination, because again, you need every skill point you can get for Abomination. So trying to slap one of these with a tier 7 Abomination relic is going to be hit and miss, super RNG. It took me 3 tries to get it. So yeah, it's not the easiest thing, but you do absolutely need this, and this is why this build requires a lot more than other builds, because this is entirely luck based. It's not something you can really target farm. For the idols, we are running health and minion cooldown recovery idols for the large idols here, and then for the adorned idols, we have more minion cooldown recovery as well as healing effectiveness. Healing effectiveness is not a big deal. It helps rip blood a bit, but that's about it. You just want the minion cooldown. So between 4 of these and 2 of these, you know, we got like 140% cooldown recovery speed, which is really, really strong. So that makes our Hungering Souls from our Abomination go from like a 6-second cast to like a 3-second cast. So he does it kind of often. Alright, so let's talk about the skills for this Abomination build. So of course we're going to be starting with Abomination. This is the main bread and butter of the build. We're running level 26 Abomination, which is really high. So we're going to come over here past Fractured End. We don't actually like this skill at all. To get the Quicken the Death, so we have just more damage, and the health decay won't matter, trust me. But 75% multiplicative damage is huge. We're going to consume our mages to get Devouring Soul, and then we're getting an additional Devouring Soul per skeleton mage we consume, so we have 5 additional souls, so we shoot a lot. And then we're going to come down here to Dominance for just some more damage multiplicative, but we also need that to get H of Undeath, which is what's going to make our Abomination not decay over time. And then we're going to come down here to Engorgement, so we get 15% more multiplicative damage for every minion consumed, and we're consuming 12 minions, so it's a lot of damage. Epicurean, which is going to give us 30% more multiplicative damage per type of minion that we're consuming, and we're consuming 5, so that's 150% more multiplicative damage. And then Death in the Family, which gives us increased attack and cast speed when we consume at least 5 minions, which we are. We could get this a little bit higher, but I feel like that's far less important than getting more fat damage just for the Hungering Souls thing. But if you want, you can take off points like over here of the Quicken the Death or Engorgement and finish off Death in the Family. But that's our Abomination. We're gonna go Skelly Mage. Speaking of Skelly Mage, this tree does not matter at all. We just want to pick up Cryomancers and Pyromancers. Nothing else matters because we're not going to use them at all. We don't want them because if we have them out, we have a chance to miss Dread Shade and Infernal Shade and hit them and not the Abomination, and that's no bueno. So yeah, those 2 points, that's all that you need. Speaking of shades, so we're going to get Infernal Shade, which we want to come over here to Devour and Flame so we can attach this to our Abomination so that we can give him haste while it's attached, which isn't super a big deal because we have haste from Veins of Malice, but this is also giving us Frenzy. But yeah, so we have haste over here, but we're doing it mostly because of demonic possession so that we can give him increased attack and cast speed and movement speed, which is the biggest thing. And getting a ramping up movement speed bonus is huge because the Abomination is slow otherwise. So this is the main point to Infernal Shade, just giving us fat movement speed for our Abomination. We come over here to get mana efficiency and cast speed, but it's, whatever. Duration we actually want. I don't know why I don't have that maxed. You can get rid of 1 point in Brimstone and get more duration, just so we don't have to summon this constantly. But yeah, that's Infernal Shade. We just want the haste. Dread Shade. So Dread Shade, we're going for a standard minion route, so we're going to come here through Lingering Doom to get more flat damage. So this is going to give us a lot of flat necrotic damage, which is good because Hungering Souls does necrotic damage as well. And we're going to come for All for One, so he gets 60% more multiplicative damage for having Dread Shade on, which is huge. And then more importantly, Egoism, which is going to make him always crit. This does put an 18-second cooldown on Dread Shade, which blows, but yeah, you have to get Egoism. It's too good to pass up. We could come over here to Pernicious Pact and then Doomed Wrath to get more multiplicative damage, but it's only 45%, and we get more of that on the Abomination tree anyway, and plus, having Everlasting Poisons applied each second means you're eventually going to kill your Abomination, and we don't want that. And then we're going to come over here to Lone Watcher so that we have 1 maximum shade, we get more shade duration, and no longer drains the health of our Abomination, so yay. And then that's pretty much it. You can come down here to Dying Coven to get increased attack and cast speed, and then I dumped the extra points I had into Duskheart just to get some damned effect. Flesh Harvest gives us 3% increased effects of all the stuff here for Dreadshade per 3% missing health. We're not going to miss too much health on Julra and stuff. You'll leech it back, so that's going to be like up and down. It's kind of whatever. Rip Blood, standard Rip Blood for Heart of Uhkeiros. We got to get Rip Spirits. We turn it to necrotic so we can use Heart of Uhkeiros. And then we're going to use Stench of Blood to direct and move around our Abomination. And then just mad cast speed so we can spam this. And then of course we have more health restoration. We don't actually need Mana Feast because we're not really using any other skills and our mana regen's good enough, but that's what we have. But yeah, pretty standard, Blood Rip for Heart of Uhkeiros. We just want cast speed, reduce the cost so it costs nothing, direct our minions, turn it to necrotic, and max your blood orb regen. So yeah. So that's all the skills that we're using. As far as the other skeletons, we aren't mastering regular skeletons just because we would have to give up something, and I don't really want to give anything else up. The extra multiplicative damage you can get for running normal skeletons as well is great, but the movement speed is what really kills the Abomination. So I would prefer having, a lot more movement speed versus, maybe 60% multiplicative damage. So, it's good, but I'd much prefer getting 72% increased attack, cast, and movement speed. So that's all the skills. Let's talk about our passive trees. So we're actually coming over here a bit harder into Alkalite than usual. This is our standard 20 for running Alkalite Necromancer. But then we come over here to Eye of the Damned because we actually are scaling necrotic damage a little bit since we're using spells. And then we also get Damned Chance, which is going to scale greatly for our Abomination. So for Necromancer, we're going to come through Risen Army for our damage, attack, and cast speed, get all of Cursed Blood because physical damage is going to increase his punches, and necrotic damage is going to increase Hungering Souls. And then we're going to get Aegis Fall because we want Armor Shred. Mortal Tether, we want Life. Unbound Necromancy because one more skeleton is, 15% more multiplicative damage. Unearthed Arms, again, this is pretty much just for the punches and stuff that he does. Not super important, but, there's not a whole lot left on this tree that we actually want. Tyrant, just so we can get one more additional skeleton. Again, 15% more multiplicative damage, really good. Attack and cast speed for our minions is great. Crit is leeched is the only reason why we have River of Bones here, just so we can leech back a bunch of our damage because we always crit. And then we're going to go with Moonlight Pyre for just a lot more flat damage, fire and necrotic. Again, we're scaling a lot of necrotic. This is just so we can branch off, but it's whatever, but it's minion necrotic damage. You can take points out of like unearthed arms and finish off this if you really want the necrotic damage, but it's not that big of a boost. We're coming up here for crit multi because we need crit multi. Crit is everything. We always crit, so that's good. And we got an additional skeleton mage for, getting our, 15% more multiplicative damage. And then we have Veins of Malice. This isn't something we necessarily need because we're getting haste off of Infernal Shade, but it does also provide Frenzy, which gives us more attack and cast speed. If you don't want this, which of course you don't need it, you can take off these 5 points and put in 1 into River of Bones for more leech. You can get in more Rite of Undeath for more necrotic damage. You can finish off Mortal Tether. You can get minion resistances, whatever you want. You don't necessarily need it. My Abomination is surviving just fine, so I just wanted the extra attack and cast speed. So our Abomination does pretty good damage when he's fully buffed up. You could see that, he's punching this thing for, 500k, 600k, 800k, a mil. Like, he does pretty good damage once you start ramping up, the extra shreds and whatnot. If you can get shred on yourself, that would actually probably help you a bit, but he does pretty good damage. Obviously he doesn't do this much damage to enemies that actually have resistances and armor, but he still hits for like 50-60k on 300 plus corruptions. So that's the gear for the Abomination, with some room for improvement, I'm sure. I'm not trying to super min-max these builds, just more trying to get proof of concept to make sure that things work and can tackle the game's content, so that when the multiplayer hits, I have a good idea of what builds are worth using. But for now, let's talk about the other things I did try for the Abomination that I decided against. First was also having 5 skeletons out after I summoned the Abomination. Seems like a good idea, having meat barriers and all, and 5 skeleton mages aren't weak either. The problem occurred though when you're trying to buff your Abomination with shades. It's a lot harder to just hit him with your Dread Shade and Infernal Shade when you have a bunch of other minions around, so you can end up wasting life, time, and cooldowns hitting your mages rather than the Abomination, which is also the reason why I'm not using Edoras Path Boots, which would increase the Abomination's movement speed, which is very much needed. Accidentally dropping the shades on Entangling Roots is bad as well, and because Dread Shade now has a 16-second cooldown, it just wastes too much time. I've also tried not using the Skeleton Abomination, where his health will actually decay over time, because I wanted to use Tail Explosion, since that would count as a spell, so we could scale that the same way as our Hungering Souls, and then reduce the cooldown to about 3 seconds as well, which lets the Abomination spam skills and does a lot more damage, and it's just a much better job at clearing. But yeah, the eventual decay got super annoying. No amount of health regen or leech could save him, and having to summon back like 19 wraiths and skeletons just took way too long to bring him back up. So yeah, he could be stronger, but having a permanent minion is always a better way to go in the long run. It just feels so much more convenient. But that's the Abomination Mage. It's solid build, it's fun, and has some style to it since it's a pretty off-meta build, I feel. If you happen to get a +4 Abomination relic, I'd try to slap that on an Uhkeiros heart and just go to town with it. It's definitely worth a try. But that's going to be all for me. Thank you all for watching, and thank you to all my Patreon members. I really appreciate you guys a whole lot. If anyone wants to talk shop or chat, feel free to join my Discord down below, ask questions, I'll help however I can in whatever game I can. So yeah, thanks again, and good luck out there, hunters. Peace.